Everybody on the team was wounded. They had a Vietnamese officer that went with them. He was killed in action. And they barely got out alive. And that was our introduction to the Secret War. Down the hill and elsewhere, this jungle was lighting up with people trying to blow us out of the sky. Well, that King took 48 hits that night, and nobody was killed. I told Spider, wait one, and turned my car 15 around. His head came up, hit him with one shot.
This is Kyle Hunter and Elijah Fleming with Don't Mean Nothing, and we are here with the one and only John Stryker Meyer, aka Tilt. John, you want to show us what you're going to be reading today? And
good morning. Yeah, when we talked about doing the interview, you said we're always looking for a different angle of things, and there's recently a book that came out. It's called Red Dirt Revelations by a mutual friend of mine. And this book asked Vietnam vets to reflect upon, today, 2024, what our frame of reference was the day we landed in Vietnam. And so I thought maybe that's a different approach to some of the previous interviews. And in it, I'd given Chad like a few pages just talking about how when I landed, what my thoughts were. And one of the key things for me today on reflection was that today, as I reflect on my 19 months of service in Southeast Asia, my mind recalls the beauty of the country, especially when flying over it in helicopters, the amazing South Vietnamese men I served with, and the fearless, peerless South Vietnamese Air Force pilots and crews of the 219th Special Operations Squadron, our beloved King Bees, who saved our recon team time and time again against extreme odds. And then first and foremost, my South Vietnamese men that I think about, Hep, Sal, Phuc, the team from Idaho, because as you know, our team got wiped out in May of '68. When it went in, it literally disappeared. And to this day, today, there are still 1,575 Americans that are still listed as missing in action from the war, for the Vietnam War in Southeast Asia. And out of that total, we have 50 plus Green Berets that are still missing in action from the Secret War in Laos and Cambodia and North Vietnam. And so think about them, the South Vietnamese, and the aviators that a lot of times we never knew the men who put their lives on the line for us. So included in the MIA total, in addition to the Special Forces, we've documented at least 85 American aviators, whether helicopter pilots, fast movers, A-1 Skyraider, that lost their lives supporting our teams, the SOG teams, during the 8-year Secret War. So today, looking back, and that reference to that book goes back to thinking about the men, the beauty of the country, and the time there. And that is, for me, when I think about it, I think about more the positive side, not the combat side, because it was, it's a side we don't talk about very much, but it's a unique start. I mean, the countryside was beautiful. The men that I served with, particularly the South Vietnamese on our team, we got to know each other really close. And I went back for a second tour of duty. We got even closer. I spent more time with them and their team hooch, eating meals at night in the indigenous mess hall with them. And we had done some of that during my first tour, but the people were just incredible. And there's so much in common. And like Sal, he was our counterpart on Idaho. And all he wanted to do was to stop fighting and go back to get a farm someday, and get 2 or 3 acres, plow it up, work the land, and so I always had a special affinity with Sal, because he was just so good in the woods. But as a farmer, because my mother's side, the family, the Stryker side, were all farmers and carpenters for over 2 centuries in central New Jersey. Right, so we came from Trenton. So that book, that thought, and that's where today I look back on those 54 years ago when I landed. It was just hot. It's one thing to train And everybody tells you when you land in Vietnam, everybody could be the Viet Cong. You just got to be heads up at all times. And so I'll never forget it. After the plane landed and we walked off that plane, you felt like you needed a knife to cut through the humidity. And then you could just smell the air that was permeated with that from the rice paddies, where they use human shit for the rice paddies, and you had that smell. And it just hit you, and the humidity like, oh, welcome. And then you look around. Okay, anybody could be the enemy. So that's a little bit of a heightened exaggeration, perhaps, but that's welcome to Vietnam. But once I got there, and when we flew over, I mean, there were times it was just beautiful. And every flight from when we launched for a target, we would launch generally from the coast or from Quang Tri launch site. So you'd fly across the country, and from 4,000 or 5,000 feet, it's beautiful. I mean, you see the bomb craters, but once you got past most of the combat zones, it's just a beautiful verdant jungle. And then you get to the target, and then they cross the fence. The door gunner would traditionally open up with their weapons to make sure they're firing okay. And that would wake you up, and then get ready for the target, and then your adrenaline's pumping. And then when the king bees, when they would go in, they had what they called the falling yellow leaf. And it would be a spiral going downward. And it would put the helicopter in auto rotation. It would just spin. The last second, they would flare. We'd touch down and be out into the jungle. So by the time we touch down, you're ready to roll. And so today, that's my thought then. And as you and I talked earlier, where did all this begin? I grew up in Trenton, New Jersey. Went to Trenton High School, graduated from high school in '64. And the Battle of the Green Beret came out like a year or two later. And in July of '64, they were getting headlines. And even in my history class, my senior year, they were talking about this conflict in Indochina. And I forget when they went from calling Indochina to just Vietnam. But we read about it in the New York Times. And in July, there was a historic battle, which was at the A camp of Roger Donlin was the captain of that A camp. And after that historic battle, he was the first American soldier to be awarded the Medal of Honor. And of course, he was the first Green Beret to get one. And at that time, he was in the 7th Special Forces Group that was sending people there temporary for 6 months. And he was at his base camp. And when the medal was awarded, he was on the front page of Life or Look magazine. It's like, what a stud. Really just a handsome guy. It's like chiseled face and everything. And so it's like, wow, this is something. Well, I went to college. It took me 2 years to flunk out. And the summer that I flunked out, I was working in Yosemite. My dad sent me a note, just said, hey, you flunked out, the draft board's going to come for you. So be ready. And like within a week or two after getting that letter from Dad, I read the book, The Green Berets by Robin Moore. And I said, you know what? I'm a city slicker from Trenton. If I'm going to go to Vietnam, I need more than just basic training and advanced infantry. And these Green Berets, it sounds really cool. So I want to try it. So I enlisted. And at that time, you listed the airborne unassigned. So you go in, guaranteed to go through jump school. And then during advanced infantry training, they told us that the Special Forces recruiters would come out. And from there, we would get tested. So it's like, okay. So I did basic training at Fort Dix, down at Fort Gordon, Georgia, for advanced infantry training. About the 4th or 5th week, we had a rainy day. We're in this huge gym. It was like a mixed building for gym, and it had a stage. And the stage was like high up, and they had steps on each side. And so we came in, sat on the floor, several hundred of us, because we're just recruits, but it's a rainy day. And it was a day to learn about other MOSs, your military occupational status. And they had cooks that would walk up, hey, you'll never be hungry. You come to work with us in the Army. It's a great career. And they had the communicators, the commo guys, military police, and different units that were at Fort Gordon and within the military. And the very last person to come in, it was right before the lunch break. I'll never forget it. This little Banty rooster of a Green Beret came in, and the stage was like 4 feet high, and everybody else came up the steps, or they were already on stage. They would speak. He came in. He was wet. He had walked in the rain. His beret was wet. His uniform was wet. It's like he just came up, did a vertical jump on the stage, turned around and said, "We're here looking for Special Forces. Anybody interested? If you know who we are, come see me outside and we'll talk." So anybody interested? Well, I read the book. I jumped right up off the floor, And me and maybe only 4 or 5 other guys with several hundred people. I'm looking around like, you guys are going to Vietnam in 2 months. I need a little bit more training if I can get it with these guys. So that's the way it worked out. We went out, we saw him, signed up, went through the battery of tests, did the runs, the swim, and all that stuff, and then we finally came to the big day. So all of us that had applied had us all together. He dismissed one group, and then he called people in one at a time. I was the last guy he called in. He made me stand there while he's going through paperwork. So he finally looked up and he says, "Meyer," he says, "you're lucky. They lowered the standards." So it's like, okay. So from there, went to jump school for 3 weeks. That was got done there in May of '68. And so for the first 5 months or 6 months in the Army, everything was training just like the movies. Get out of bed, they shake you up in the morning, and jump school, like 2 o'clock in the morning, they throw you out of your bed just to shake you up to see if you can quit or not. We got through jump school, okay. And then that night, we took a late bus, up to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And it took us to headquarters company. We got in there maybe 10:30, 11:30 at night. So we all get out, and we're all like acting just like you do at jump school, get out, get in formation. And this guy comes out with his flip-flops, some shorts, and maybe a T-shirt. I forget what he's wearing, but really casual. It's like, all right, welcome to a Special Forces training group. You guys are here. There's a mess hall there. If you guys are hungry, go over to get sandwiches. Aren't you going to fuck with us? I mean, we're like, everybody standing, says, hey, this is Special Forces training. And it was really a real eye-opener. He said, we got the weekend. So here's the barracks. He told us where to get the beds. This is temporary. And said Monday morning, everything will get squared away. You'll be assigned to a company. And but for now, go get some sandwiches, to breakfast tomorrow, and relax. What? And again, a couple of guys are going, you're not going to make us do push-ups or anything? No, this is Special Forces. And that's the way it went from that point on. We had the training through May. For me personally, me and several of our buddies that I got to know really well, like Rick Howard, Johnny McIntyre, Tony Harrell, we all went through commo training, and we got recycled because commo was Morse code. You had to learn, you had to get up. Not only did you have to learn each letter, but you had to get to a certain speed of what they called 15 word groups per minute was the minimum. And so a word group would have 5 letters, and you had to do 15 of those in 1 minute. Well, eventually we got past it, but Sergeant Paul Villarosa, he was our trainer. When we all got recycled, he goes, look, we'll work with you. He came in at nights. We'd go back. On the weekends, he would come in, and he had a tattoo across his neck, cut here. And so he had 3 tours in Vietnam. So we knew him, we really respected him, and he trained us up. So we got the MOS, then we had the FTX, jumped at night, and it was the first night jump, and we jumped at night 800 feet. And in the training group and in jump school, when we jumped, it was 1,250 feet, which was the height of the Empire State Building, basically jumping off the Empire State Building with a parachute. Cool. Loved it, enjoyed it, but this was different. because we jumped and you landed within, it was really quick. And we had at least one guy that broke a leg, another guy broke his back, and we could hear guys in the trees screaming from the agony. And this is our training. We were out there, and of course, the typical Army, this is now December, maybe around December 15th to 17th, we're in the mountains of the Uari Forest. And our jungle training, it snowed. We're up in the snow. So we got through it. And when we graduated, right before Christmas, and then our guys, the combo guys, a bunch of us went down to Fort Gordon, TDY, to learn radio teletype. Because some of the 8 camps had radio teletype, and of course what we didn't know was MACV-SOG had it too. So Villa Rose and a couple of others said, hey, when you go to Vietnam, at the end of your in-country training, they're going to ask you if you want to volunteer for a special project. Don't do it. Just say no, go to a Green Beret 8 camp, learn about the people, the customs, the country, special forces and their history and things like that. Okay. Well, we get there, we go through the in-country training, and like the night or two before, there was the movie, The Green Berets with John Wayne. So we're sitting there, and sure enough, here comes this little Joe Bip the Ragman comes out. We're looking for volunteers. And Johnny Mac goes, for what? He said, can't say. Either you're in or you're not. Well, we all volunteered. We just saw what would the Duke do, right? And that was SOG. So the next day we go up to Da Nang and we get the top secret briefing. And at that point, we've been in class for over a year. So we come into the room, curtains all over all the windows, and there's a big blackboard or something with a sheet or some kind of a cloth over it, right? And we sit down, we're pulling our pads and pens out, and the sergeant major comes and says, put that shit away. He said, this is a top secret briefing. There's a piece of paper there. Read it. This is an NDA, non-disclosure agreement. He said, you cannot, from this point forward, you cannot talk about anything that happens today or for the next 20 years about this operation. Read it. If you don't want to sign it, you can leave. There's no hard feelings. Well, we all signed it, went into the briefing, pulls the curtain down, and there's South Vietnam with I Corps, 2 Corps, 3 Corps, 4 Corps down south. Just regular names of cities. Here's Laos, target boxes, all throughout Laos. The DMZ, targets west into Laos, and of course Cambodia. And then he went on to explain the secret war. And near the end of that briefing, or during that time, that day, when we were there, we learned that Sergeant First Class Paul Villarosa, our hero, the man that got us through Camo, was KIA. He went out on a mission out of FOB 4, Da Nang. So in 68, there were 6 FOBs for SOG. FOB 1 was Phu Bai, FOB 2 was Kontum, 3 was Khe Sanh. And we had a MACV-SOG compound up there right next to the Marine Corps that went through the historic siege of Khe Sanh. FOB 4 was Da Nang, 5 was Bami Tuat, and then FOB 6 was Ho Nok Tao. And so we were stunned because Villarosa had run one of the first missions out of FOB 4, Da Nang, right around New Year's Day. And they made heavy contact, and we learned later that not only was he killed, but they got him and another American. They kept one American alive, and the NVA had a flamethrower, and they literally burnt them with a flamethrower. And this kid came back, and they immediately took him to Saigon. We never heard. But months later, we learned about that detail. And so just the fact that the guy who got us through training and with our MOS and everything was KIA was a real kick in the groin. But the mission had to go on. So the next day, Johnny McIntyre and I and John Hutchins, we all flew up to FOB 1. Now, again, here's the in-country culture shock, right? In our in-country training and in Fort Bragg, any training we did was with UEs and of course C-130s when we did the jump. And in the country, we had several experimental helicopters. We had Chinooks. I don't think we saw any of the HH-3s or the CH-53 Deltas, but they were the bigger Sikorsky models. So we're all thinking American assets. Well, nobody ever told us about this H-34, which was the old helicopter where the pilots would sit up higher, and in the back was where the passengers rode, and where we sat, you could see the feet of the pilot and the co-pilot. And it's like, WTF? This is the South Vietnamese Air Force. Nobody ever told us about that. And so the first thought was, this is really different. And so we get in the H-34, and again, because this is a helicopter with struts with wheels on it and a wheel in the back, so they could roll. Whereas the slicks you had to take off because they just had the rungs there, just metal rungs. And so an F-4 takes off, another F-4, and the H-34 rolls out and waits. Instead of just taking off like a helicopter would, it officially rolled out to get to the runway. And then finally, he goes down the runway and takes off. It's like, this is crazy. We just use the same runway that the Phantom jets use, right? So we fly up. It's a beautiful flight up. And we're flying parallel to Highway 1, which was the only road from Hanoi all the way down to Saigon. We're flying, and we're on the west side of it. And then all of a sudden, we're sitting like this. The helicopter's going straight, and it literally did a turn, and it did a 90-degree turn where if you're sitting like this, the next thing you know, you're looking straight down at the ground. Now, when I got in the helicopter, I saw the door gunner go, because we had our new fatigues, our new jungle boots. And so Johnny McIntyre and Hutchins were there, and they go, oh shit, we're all grabbing onto the web. We figure we're going to fall out of the helicopter. So they turned, flew over the base on its side, then came back up and landed. And that was like the welcome to Fubai, FOB-1. We get off, a recon team gets on. The team goes in, and it was ST Idaho with Sergeant Glenn Oliver Lane and Robert Duval Owen, who was the 1-1. And years later, we learned that Sergeant Owen, he had previous tours of duty. And on May 1st, he left his home in South Carolina, hitchhiked across the country to Washington, gets on a flight, and the money he saved, so the reason why he hitchhiked was to save money from the flight. He sent the cash home that he could have spent for the flight. Sends it home to his wife. He had talked to his daughter, Robin, and said, hey, I'll be back for Christmas, or maybe next year for your birthday. Well, they get on the helicopter and they disappeared. And they're 2 of the 50 Green Berets that are still MIA today. And so within the next day or two, there was a bright light, went in with Spike Team Oregon, George Sternberg, Mike Tucker, and everybody on the team was wounded. They had a Vietnamese officer that went with them. He was killed in action. And they barely got out alive. And that was our introduction to the Secret War. And by May of 68, we had several teams that had been wiped out in SOG. And of course, we had heard about some of them. In March, we had 2 teams one was wiped out for everybody except the 1-0. And then we had our ST Alaska, where everybody was killed, and John Allen survived and got out somehow. And John Allen was there in camp. And we had another helicopter that was shot down. It was just a chase helicopter, because usually you have for an insertion, there'd be the lead helicopter puts in the team, first part of the team, second helicopter for second part of the team. And if any of the helicopters got shot down or there was any medical emergency, you had a chase helicopter. Well, the chase got shot down, and the sergeant on that was killed. So we were aware of all this. We land, we hear about this, Idaho, the bright light, and it's like, welcome to the Secret War. This is serious business. And so Spider Parks had been on Idaho and been just promoted. And Glenn Lane said, you've got enough experience, get your own team. So they took him off Idaho, and he was in a transition to get a new team. And fortunately, Hep, who was the interpreter for Idaho, and Nguyen Van Sao, who was the counterpart, he was the Vietnamese team leader on the team. They were slated. Hep was sick and couldn't go, and Sal, it was his rotation to miss that mission, fortunately. So with Spider, Sal, and Hep, we rebuilt the team. They hired several young guys. We hired 3 15-year-old kids, brought them on the team, and then Spider and Sal trained us up and did in-country training, some night ambushes. Our first missions in the Ashall, we put in Air Force sensors, and the sensors, we had like a central unit with an antenna, and then they had coaxial cable. They had to bury the whole thing, put them in, and they all had these sensors. And so anything that came down the road, the sensors could pick it up. Then the Air Force could pick up the information from the computers. So we did 2 of those missions, and then
Where did you find those guys, the 15-year-old kids?
I didn't.
Yeah.
Hep and Sal did it.
Oh, they knew him already.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and again, I don't know what that detail was, because Spider was the team leader, so he worked with Hep and Sal, and they ran it together. And when and years later, not years, but a few months later, we brought in 3 more people to the team, and on each one we would talk it over. By the time I was a team leader, we brought in Hung, and then we brought in a guy named Vo, and when Lin Black came on the team, we got Do Thi Quang. And Quang was with Lin Black on October the 5th, 1968, when that 9-man team came up against 10,000. And that's just one of our more historic missions. Excuse me, Lin. Young kids. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And of the 3 that we hired, Sung was really good. He's the first one that came up. We trained him and Sal and Phuc would be, any mission, they would run point. And Phuc at that point, Sal had him trained enough that Phuc always ran point, and then Sun, S-O-N, was trained up, and eventually, by November or December, Sun would run point. And we started dressing him up with a full NVA uniform. But that was the way the team was formed, and we got Quang, because he was with Lin, survived that day. And again, we know the numbers of the 10,000 NVA, which was an NVA division at the time, because Lin Black, who was on that team, talked to the North Vietnamese officer who ambushed him that day. He was a colonel. And when the team inserted, they had an inexperienced Green Beret team leader, and he didn't listen to Lin. They said, hey, we shouldn't walk down a trail. And they saw an NVA flag in the background somewhere. And Lin goes, this means, he thought it was a battalion, maybe 3,000. He recommended that they not stay on the ground. And the second helicopter taking gunfire. So the team leader, instead of the right thing to do, if you get shot at, you're compromised. They should have got back on the helicopter and got out. But he was rude and didn't listen to the experienced guys. So he walked into an L-shaped ambush where it's 50 NVA, where it had a higher ridge line. It was L-shaped. And they killed the team leader, they killed the pointy man, and then later during the day, a third member of the team, a South Vietnamese, died from wounds. And then all the other 6, they were all wounded, either from shrapnel, things like that. And Lin talked to the guy in the ambush, so they got that detail. So we had, with Idaho, in my time, we had run 3 separate missions, and Spider was like, hey, we just ran 3 missions. We haven't even had a serious firefight. You didn't even get your combat infantryman badge yet. Usually you get them on your first or second mission, you know. And that's an award you get for combat with the enemy. And so we're laughing about it. So we have October 5th, October 6th, and we get inserted. And that's where, this is their cover photo from across the fence. We have the 6-man team. It's Jim Davidson. He came to the team from the 173rd. we have Don Wolkin, who's the team leader. Myself, I was the assistant team leader. I carried the radio. And then we have Fook, the point man that day, Hep, our interpreter, and Sal. And when we took that picture, they were really unhappy. They were very superstitious. They said, we never do this again. So, but we got the pictures, get inserted. We're on the ground all day. We had trackers on us. They came up close to us that night where we set up our RON for the rest overnight slot. So we had our perimeter set up. And the next day we moved out. And we moved all day. And around about 2 o'clock, we got up to the top of a little knoll. And we had been going up an animal trail, really narrow animal trail. We had gone up this mountain. And we weren't at the top yet, but as we went up and went around the corner, and I was in the back. Sal was the tail gunner. I was number 5 of the 6-man team. And Don was up front with Fook. Davidson was behind him. Then we had Hep. And when they ran around the corner, I hear Sal going, he's just hissing. I look back, he pointed. So back down that trail, maybe 150 yards back, there were 2 tall NVA standing with their AK-47s at port arms. And I wanted to get the M79 and pop it. Sal goes, no. But they were smiling. And it was like, it blew our mind, It's like, what? WTF? So I told Don, we went up we were on that corner, that he took us up a rise. And we got on top of a knoll, set up a perimeter, and he told me to make a commo check. Well, I tried to make a commo check, couldn't make a connection with anybody. I opened up a can of apricots or peaches. I'm just halfway through opening it up, and they opened fire. They hit us. But Hep and Sal heard them first and fired on them, and they were coming at us. And I forget what direction. We'll just say for today, they came at us from the north. They came up that knoll, and we blew them back down. They came back, and I'm there opening up my can. I spilled some of the nectar on my car 15. And in my silly mind, I'm going like, I can't believe I spilled my nectar on my car 15. These guys are fighting for our lives, right? So we go on with the firefight. It went on for over 2 hours. And before we had any radio contact, we made contact. And at some point, Spider Parks came out. By now, he'd been promoted. Our forward air controllers were called Covey, that's the code name. And they had a Cessna 02, a push-pull, and they had an Air Force pilot. We had a Covey rider. And the Covey rider was an experienced Green Beret who had been on the ground, and he would talk to the teams on the ground. So we had somebody direct who was familiar with the situations, what it was like to be on the ground. And so he came out. We were able to make contact, visual contact, and I hit him with a mirror. And because at first we had moved so far, they weren't quite sure where we were. So I finally, like when he came out, we first started to say, where are you? I said, I'm at your 9 o'clock. Then they would turn and come back. Say, I'm at your, oh, you went past us. And then we get him on an angle, we hit him in the mirror, they could say, okay, I see you're flashy. So then they knew exactly where we were. And then we're still in contact. And then he started bringing in the air assets, the fast movers, A1 Sky Raiders with the napalm. We made napalm runs. It was the first time we smelled burnt human flesh. And they kept coming at us. And at one point, Don Wolkin and I, because we were still trying to make radio contact, and he goes, look at what they're doing. And I looked in the jungle, and I couldn't quite see it. It was only maybe 10, 15 feet away. He said they're stacking up their dead. We killed so many, and they were stacking them up so that they could get on top of their dead to shoot down at us. And they kept coming. And again, you talk about combat, when you're in combat, you hear about tunnel vision, right? So at one point, when they had one of their rushes at us, I'm firing at the enemy coming up the hill, and Fook, I thought Fook was firing over my shoulder. And, but my hearing just got really screwed up because you know what it's like with the blast of a Car 15. And anyways, got it, finally made the contact. Spider was there. He had to fly back. We got another cubby with Pat Watkins, was the cubby rider. We had helicopter gunships, the muskets. Scarface was there. We kept doing all the gun runs. They kept coming at us all day. And at last light, Spider saw an open area they thought was big enough that we could get a King Bee into it, not being able to land. Well, sure enough, the King Bee came. We could hear him coming. And we went through. We had to go about 10 yards, but it was elephant grass. And it took us at least 10 minutes to get to that helicopter, going through the elephant grass, because the elephant grass is anywhere from 8 to 12 feet tall. And what would happen the first time, I was running, pushing it down, then I fell, and Wolfman ran on my back, and the little people ran across my back. Wolfman fell, I ran across his back, and so we're all going. We finally get to the elephant grass. It's blown down. Captain Tin with the King Bee is sitting there, hovering for 10 minutes waiting for us to get there. And so we finally get there. We throw the guys on the helicopter. We're doing gun runs. And it's down to me and Don. And the H-34 had a couple steps to it, right? And so Don goes, I'm the 1-0. You get on. And something happened. We slipped. I just grabbed him. He weighed about 230 pounds, and I'm only like 175, but the adrenaline's flowing. I just picked him up, and Lily threw him up onto the ladder. And they turned around and grabbed me and pulled me in. And as we left, I was down to my last hand grenade, down to my last magazine. We had over 600 rounds that we had gone through. And as we left, it was almost dark. And the other side was this whole dichotomy of beauty and deaths. As we're leaving, as the King Bee's pulling up, you look back at the jungle, it's this verdant, dark green with all these pretty red flashes and green tracers, like Christmas time, right? The green tracers, the red flashes, and they were just trying to shoot us down. And I don't know, to my mind, there's hundreds of them. Some from the area right around our LZ, down the hill, and elsewhere, this jungle was lighting up with people trying to blow us out of the sky. Well, that King Bee took 48 hits that night, and nobody was killed. And so as we're flying, Captain Tin flew directly south for a few minutes, and on the right was the final moments of that sunset. And it was, of course, the sweetest damn sunset we had ever seen. For me particularly, that was my first real combat. And, and at that point, I looked at Sal. And Sal came over and went, that nod. It was like, whoa. That's the first time that Sal acknowledged me like, hey, you done good.
How old were you?
What then? 20, this was 68, 22.
And how thick is this foliage?
It was, we were in triple canopy.
So you can't see.
We can't see too far, no. And thankfully, we had we had the triple canopy where they came out of, and for some reason there's like elephant grass that went down the hill, and there was like an area where we had enough firefight where they came up at us. But it wasn't triple canopy. And at one point, we'd had so much gunfire down the hill and up the hill at us that some of the elephant grass was beginning to get lowered. And at one point, I was on the radio. So now I'm not facing the front to north. I was like facing to the east. And I'm on the radio with Spider. And I see something moving. And it was an NVA's ass. He was crawling up, and you see his ass move as he comes up the hill. And I told Spider, wait, one.
and I turned my car 15 around, and his head came up, hit him with one shot. And the spider was pissed because I didn't let go of the handset. So he's listening. And when the gunshot went off, it hurt his ears. So that night he chewed my ass out. You dumbass, from now on, whenever you kill somebody, let go of the handset. And then the other dumbass, well, when we get back to Fubai, Captain Tin lands, and I say, Captain Tin, come on, let's go to the club. I want to buy you a drink. She says, no, my wife is waiting home for dinner. What? Well, thank you, sir. You're never buying a drink in our club ever again. And so he flew home to his wife, had dinner with her, and we had a floor show that night. So nobody was out there to greet us. So we had to go across the street, walk in, and then I got the team sandwiches and some chow, and Don went into S2, gave them a quick briefing, and then we went down to the club, and they're in there. Here's this floor show. Oh, this guy, hey, welcome back. There's a great floor show going on. And me and Wolken are going like, we just barely got out of there alive. And that's one of those little dichotomies, going from...
How does a guy that comes from Trent, New Jersey in the city go from that to just being able to get through jungle like that? That has to be something that takes a lot of getting used to.
A lot of getting used to. And by that time, we had been from the ambushes and the other missions, we had been in triple canopy, but never hunted like we were with the trackers. And again, it's our South Vietnamese, Phuc, Sao, Hep, those guys, because they always ran point. And like the first time we're on the ground, within the first hour, Phuc walked into a beehive, some kind of a bees. He got stung. Sal and Wolken got stung because I was near the back of the formation. And a couple hours later, when we're on the ground, we would move for 10 minutes and then stop and listen for 10 minutes. Because the jungle had its own life, its own environmental noises, for the animals, the birds, insects, whatever. So whenever we stopped, the jungle life would come back to a normal volume of noise. If it didn't, then you knew something could happen that wasn't positive. So in answer to your question, for me, I never felt completely comfortable in the early days. It was just extreme things to get used to. And like on that first mission, there was at least, I forget how many times, there was at least twice that Phuc pointed out pit vipers that we went around as we moved in the jungle. We never crossed trails. We never walked on trails. If you came to a trail, we had an SOP set up to go across it. One person would go across it, the next person would go across, try to use the same footprint. And then everybody go across. The last person that came across would be in charge of cleaning up the footprints. So if anybody comes down the trail, they don't see the footprints. And so it was getting used to it, the mosquitoes and everything like that, the bugs. But with them running point, anything of danger, they would see it first to give us the heads up on it. And that night, when we finally set up the RON, the rest overnight spot, again, we had the perimeter set up. We put claymores out like we did every night. And in the morning, we had gone out and you saw tiger footprints. We had heard a tiger moving around the perimeter. And also we heard other movement that got in front of one of the claymores. It was 2 o'clock in the morning in the jungle in Laos. And I talked to Wolk and I said, something's in front of the claymore. Do you want me to blow it? And I thought he said go. He said no. Anyway, I cranked off this claymore. Sal was pissed. Phuc was pissed. Hep was pissed. Don was really pissed. And but anyways, we the little communications failure there. Next morning we get up, we moved, we heard the trackers again, and we just had that incident that I talked about. And so that was my first real test. And there we were in the triple canopy all the time until we got to that knoll and that elephant grass that we got through to get to the king bee. And then from that time on, any of our missions in Laos were most often in at least triple canopy, sometimes double. And the triple canopy could go up to 150 feet. So it means there's a layer of growth, another layer, and then a third layer of growth, which I never understood at all. The botanists know about that. They give you more details. But it was a little bit cooler, and the ground was always damp, because they didn't get much sun down there.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
impressive.
Yeah. So after that mission, Don was the 1-0, and in September, Spider got promoted to be a cubby rider. And then Don became a cubby rider, and they came to me, and they said, you want to be the 1-0? And I was really hesitant because we'd had those 4 missions, including Echo 4, which is the target we were on October 6th and 7th. And I remembered vividly what had happened with Lynn Black in Alabama on October the 5th. So I talked it over with Spider. We went down, talked it over with Hep and Sal, and they said, okay. They gave me the green light. So I said yes, and became the 1-0. That's the code for our recon teams. The American team leader would be a 1-0. There's the 1-1 was the assistant, 1-2 was the the radio operator. The 0-1 would be Sal. He's our counterpart for the team leader. 0-2 was the interpreter. And then we had the grenadier. I thought the grenadier would be like a 0-9. And then each of the Vietnamese team members had their number. And so that we had any radio contact, if anybody was injured or killed in an accident, we would give them that number. But for our missions, we never had anybody killed. We had people hit with shrapnel from hand grenades and from the B-40 rockets. But during my time, my 19 months on the team, we never had a KIA. And very fortunate. But so I became the team leader. Jim, who ran that mission with us, he asked to leave the team. He said he'd never experienced anything like that. He had had a tour of duty previous with the 173rd. He has seen a lot of combat there. And Jim said, look, I've never seen anything like this. And I don't think I can do it again. And I said, thank you for telling me. And he stood tall in the jungle and went to the sergeant major and said, Jim doesn't want to be on the team, but he did good with us. And SOG was all volunteer. You could unvolunteer yourself anytime you wanted. And with his case, he did it with honor. Said, hey, give him a good job. And I forget what Jim got. And we never saw him again. He left camp within 2 or 3 weeks after that. He got another assignment somewhere. So I became the team leader. And before we knew it, we were, so he left, Don left, and then John Bubba Shore became a team member. And trained John up. He learned things really quick. And by November, we were running missions almost every day. We would do, we had several missions that were relatively historic. And we also had a period of time when we would go in and get shot out of the primary, the secondary, the alternate LZ, fly back to base, have lunch, get a new target, and go back. And when that happened, they said, let's come up with an idea where we'll find a spot of jungle where there's no visible trails. We'll drop a 2,000-pound bomb. It'll clear the LZ. You can go in and land the helicopter. The team gets out. And this way you can do a true recon without any hassles from the NVA. Because they had, we knew that they had the people that watched that could be potential LZs. And we also knew from our intel reports they had people in South Vietnam that when a helicopter would go west, that they would take the vector. And we also were told that the NVA had monitors along the border. So when a helicopter entered Laos, again, they would give them the azimuth that they were flying and that they were aware that we were coming. And so this case is let's try the 2,000 pounder. So the first day, I forget what the aircraft was, but they came in, they dropped a 2,000 pounder, and the King Bee had 2 steps on it, and the passenger door was on the right side of the helicopter. And so we see the explosion. I gear up, hook into the rope, and I'm getting ready to get out in the step. And as the King Bee's descending into the LZ, it's smoking and everything, there's a secondary explosion. There's a tertiary explosion, another explosion. So we pulled out because shit was exploding. So here in the middle of the jungle, where we thought it would be just a jungle, we drop a bomb, get out and go run a mission, we had all these secondary explosions. I forget how many we had, but there were a lot. And to this day, Ho Chi Minh and the boys are trying to figure how them SOG guys learn about our supply base and that cache. So we came back and did it again the next day. Same thing, same MO. And this time they dropped a 2,000 pounder. It didn't take down all the trees, so we had to rappel in. So I rappelled in. As I'm rappelling down the rope, I can hear somebody yelling to somebody back over on the LZ, and the LZ is still smoking from the bomb. And so as soon as I get on the ground, I gave Henry King the sign that we're compromised. And so I'm out of the rope. The King Bee takes off. So I'm on the ground. These two are talking back and forth. I can see an NVA come down. I hit him with an M79, and there's light fire, not a lot of gunfire. The King Bee comes back, and Captain Tuong is flying, and they drop the ropes down. I hook in, and as I'm leaving, because we had trees that were on the ground, and I'm juggling that, my weapon, and I'm still aware of there's people back here who I think are locals, because there's no gunfire. The gunfire is coming from up on my right, what little there was. And so as I'm lifting off, I hook in, and we had a Swiss seat, a rope Swiss seat, and a D-ring. They dropped the rope down with a sandbag with a D-ring. Hook in, and I had a D-ring on my shoulder that you're supposed to hook into. Well, when we're lifting off, they opened fire again. And then Captain Tuong hears the gunfire, and instead of waiting and continuing to rise above the jungle, he started to fly away. And I'm still in the jungle. So now I'm like my nickname, Tilt. Like the human pinball. I'm ricocheting off the trees on the way out. And we're going back and forth to hold on to the rope. So as I'm going up, fired at him, I fired one M79 round down there. And we finally clear, and we come out. My arms are, the crook of each arm is bloodied from getting bounced around and ricocheting off the trees and stuff. And I never hooked into my D-ring. So we're flying, we're heading back to South Vietnam, and I went to transfer my arms because I was just sore from getting bounced around. When I went to transfer, I flipped upside down. And I flipped upside down. I remember Henry King is leaning out, and I'm giving Henry, get me down sign. Well, the Swiss seat goes down to my knees, and my legs are spread. And now all my web gear and my rucksack is all choking me out. So I can feel it choking me out. I'm beginning to lose consciousness. I spread my feet, and then the ropes go down to the feet, and I'm just dangling there like a New York City hooker, my legs spread and hanging on for dear life. And my life literally passed before my eyes, like that last second right before you're going to die. And I see scenes from back home. My kindergarten sweetheart, Dolores. I remember Dolores, my dad's Volkswagen, my dad's milk truck that we grew up on. And I passed out. When I passed out, I thought I felt elephant grass, but I wasn't sure. But Captain Tuong had been descending at the time, which I didn't realize. And when I passed out, I fell maybe 10, 15 feet into elephant grass. So fell down, King Bee landed. Henry King came out, took off my web gear, picked me up, threw me in the King Bee. And I remember waking up with my head bouncing off the metal floor going,
oh, this hurts, but this is cool. This is good pain. I'm alive, But all my web gear was left there. My Car 15, my M79, my SOG knife. So somewhere they're back there in Laos somewhere. But we got back, and Captain Tuong saved me that day. So that's one of the early days of November. And, a few days later, we had another mission. And we always wanted to capture an NVA prisoner. That was the best source of intel. And we had developed a ambush where we had C4, a block of C4 cut to a certain length, because Lynn Black had detonated himself, learning what the perfect length was. So at 6 feet, you have the plastic explosive, and that would knock out anybody walking in front of it. From our sight, 6 feet out would knock somebody out. Then we had Claymore mines, which had 4 to 50 ball bearings in them, and would just kill anything else. So that person would be the center, Claymores to the right and to the left, then Claymores on the flanks, and Claymores behind us. So we had a day before, in the morning and the afternoon, we got shot out of LZs. In the morning, we got shot out. I transferred some of the people, and some of our little people, South Vietnamese, and we went in with an 8-man team. So on this day, we go out, we get inserted, and it was instead of triple canopy, there were areas that had been slash and burn, and we got the team, and I just moved up the mountain quickly, and instead of stopping, doing 10 and 10, I just pushed the team really hard because I felt hinky. We had bad weather, but we were clear enough to get in. So on that day, got up this mountain, we moved, came to the trail, and it was big. It was a big trail, big enough to take tanks down. And so we each crossed it, got set up, and Sal put up a wiretap. We saw a telephone pole. So Sal goes up, set the wiretap up. We put in place the ambush, the perfect ambush with the C4, the Claymores on the flank, in the back. And we're just sitting there. Spider comes back maybe an hour later. We're watching. They didn't know we were that far up the mountain. We were watching NVA go down the road. Diddy Bob. And one guy had an AK on his shoulder. Another guy had an SKS. They're just walking and talking. They didn't know we were there. Took pictures. And Spider came back. And now we're in triple canopy, so I have no idea what the weather is. I gave Spider the code, which is, I'll see you back at the LZ in an hour. We'll have a POW, and Bubba and I are just sitting there going, this is so cool. We'll get a POW, because if you get a POW, you go to R&R anywhere in the world, and you got a $100 bonus. So we're like, oh man, is it going to be China, Hawaii? Where are we going to go? So we give Spider the code, and he goes, I'm at 10,000 feet. I can't see the mountain you're on, let alone the LZ. It's like, oh my God, fuck me to tears, right? It's like, this is not good. And right after that radio transmission, he says, get the high ground and dig in, because this storm center has moved in, and we don't know when we're going to be able to pull you out. So if you make contact, you're on your own. Get the high ground, set up the Claymores, and okay, so right after that, up behind us, we hear tanks starting up. Now on the trail, they're not diddy bopping anymore. There's NVA going back and forth. And they're really, now there's something going on. They know that there's a team on the ground. So Sal pulls in the wiretap. We pull in all the Claymores. We move out, and we come from this direction up the mountain. We cross the trail, and within a while, we could hear the dogs. And now we're getting to the point of the day where it's getting darker. And so we moved parallel to the trail. We crossed it and continued to move away from the LZ. And we came to a stream. And It was about maybe 6-8 foot bank with a little stream or a brook, but there was flowing water in it. And because we heard all these damn dogs, we put down powdered mace, black pepper, and then we got into that stream and literally walked up the stream, headed up the mountain, again, away from that LZ. And I had the team go out, setting up false trails. So if the dogs would come on, they'd follow the false trails. Again, put down some mace, and it got dark. But we continued up the mountain for a little while longer, and then we came to a point where we had a bank about 8 feet, maybe 10 feet high. The team went up the bank. We set up an RON, and I faced the bank looking back down. And so that night, and of course, in between all that, Sal had climbed a tree and told us there's hundreds of people coming. They could see the lanterns, they could see the dogs, and that's why we pushed hard, even though it was night and even though we're in that little stream bed. So we get the RON set up, and around about midnight or 1 o'clock, a couple of NVA came up that stream, 2 of them, 1 lantern, and they went up the stream and they ran out of fuel. They turned around and came back. As they're walking past, Hep coughed, and they stopped right where I'm facing down at the stream. Well, to make a long story short, one of the NVA crawled up that bank towards me. I can't see him. It's black, dark as night. Now, we had earlier in the night, we had lightning bugs, and they were lighting us up. And I swear, they were the biggest lightning bugs I'd ever seen. When they would light up, you could see for 2 or 3 feet away. And fortunately, at that time of night, most of the lightning bugs had taken a rest. But I could hear this guy coming, and he only moved when the wind blew. So the wind would blow, he would crawl, wind would blow, crawl. And I could tell he's getting close. I'm just sitting there, my feet spread, my car 15 pointing in that direction. Finally, he touched my boot, and I could hear him go, but he didn't do anything further. When the wind blew, he backed up. When the wind blew, he backed up further. He finally went down the hill. He and his buddy left. Then at first light, we left. And I didn't want to fire or shoot or anything because they didn't know where we were. I mean, the body of NVA, they were searching for us. So by the time he got down the hill and told them, I'm not sure what happened. I'm sure they may have come back. But we took off. First light, we were out of there. We moved up the mountain all day, got to the top. And along the way, twice, Sal and Son took turns running point, and they saw woodcutters. But they're just woodcutters. And we didn't do anything with them. And they took off. So we didn't know if they were going to tell the NVA or not. So we went up. At last light, we finally get to the top of the mountain, and we're beat. We're just dead, tired, beat. And we finally get to the top, set up the RON for the night. And about midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, we look over to the mountain range, like 2 or 3 mountains away, and the mountain lit up. Because again, it's dark. Now, we're on a hilltop. It's not triple canopy there. So you can see, you got a view from this mountaintop, you know. And we can see this mountain light up like Broadway. A swath of lights light up. And it was the NVA lighting up a drop zone. And I'm scanning through the radio now. And I pick up Russians talking on the radio for that drop site. They come in and made a supply drop. And so I get on our TAC air, said, come on, guys, give me some TAC air. I got Russians. We couldn't get anybody. Like the police, you know, when you need them, you have a hard time getting out to them. So anyways, the Russians made their resupply, and then they left. And we stayed up there for 2 more days, Sal and Son, and they would go out, come back, do a little area recon, see what was going on. And there was nothing on that part of the mountain where we were. So we stayed there because every day Spider would come back and say, hey, the weather, you're socked in. We could see it. We couldn't see it. We could hear them. We only had a combo check. And then at night, the airborne command center would be over us. We had in Southeast Asia, they had an airborne command center up 24 hours a day. In the day, it was Hillsborough. At night, it was codenamed Moonbeam. So at midnight, they would always check with us. And by the fifth day, the weather was breaking. So we moved out, went back down the mountain, staying away from where we had been. And that night, we set up our RON, and we came into this area that had these huge granite things coming out of the ground. It reminded me of Stonehenge in the middle of Laos. So we went into this area, and that's where we used our RON that night, put the claymores out. And then in the morning, we asked for extraction because we'd been in 5 days because of the weather. I had a tooth that broke. And so I had really just a bad sore tooth. And I kept packing it with rice. And we got to the LZ. Then Henry King had carried an experimental M79 with him. And it wasn't really an M79. It could fire the 40 mic round. And it could fire 4 or 5 rounds. And Henry carried this thing for the whole mission. And so finally we get down to the LZ, ask for the extract, and they say, hey, another team's in contact. And we could hear the NVA coming towards us. And we had left behind claymores, some toe poppers, and they started exploding. So we knew the NVA were coming for us. Now, how they knew, don't know, but they were coming for us. At one point, we finally get out on the LZ, and we make more contact, and Henry King fired off 4 rounds with the M79. Then Bubba and I backed him up, and we had 2 on with us with his M79, and we suppressed him with like 7 M79 rounds and 1 barrage. Boom. Henry pumped these things off. In contact. They finally came in to get us, and when the gunships got shot up when they made their gun runs, and the 101st Airborne came in. It was the first time we had the 101st Airborne. So I told Bubba, I said, you go down and let them know that we got South Vietnamese. I don't want any of those young door gunners to light up our little people. So we got down, we got out under heavy gunfire, and got extracted. And then, of course, the little cyborg had Scarface, which was the Marine Corps. Their gunships were attached to us in SOG. And they had a Lieutenant Colonel Robinson, who was the OIC of their aircraft. And that night, we got back to the bar. We showered and shaved and everything. And he's there. He goes, man, I'm so tired of you guys. So look at my helicopter. And it shot out the windshield, the plexiglass windshield and everything. And he said, look at my helicopter. It's full of these holes from you guys. Every time I go out there, he's complaining. I buy him a drink, buy him a second drink. He's still bitching and moaning. And so finally I said, Colonel, I said, I'm sorry, man, about your aircraft. But so does that mean you're not going to come next time? He said, I didn't say that. And they always came. It's just one of those little moments in time there. So, and then from there, we had FOB 6, for whatever reason, they were low on recon teams. They were in a training cycle or something. So we were assigned TDY to, we went down to Ho Nok Tao, FOB 6. Got down there a few days before Thanksgiving. Mark Gentry was down there with his team. Mark and I got through training group together. And so Bubba and I, we took the team down, and we did some additional training for a day or two. And then the colonel, the OIC, Lieutenant Colonel Drake, he said, we got a mission, and it's going to be yours. And he says, we have 3 NVA divisions that are missing. The 1st, the 3rd, and the 7th NVA divisions. And the CIA, DIA lost contact with him. And we were up that night with him and with the S3. We were going over the latest intel reports, trying to figure out where would be a good LZ to go into. So he said, by the way, he said, tomorrow's Thanksgiving. You guys are new here. So what I'll do is before you launch, we'll set up a Thanksgiving dinner. You can have it for breakfast. Oh, well, thanks, Colonel. That's really cool. So first light, we're up. We go to the launch site, which is up at Budop. And sure enough, here comes the helicopter with the Thanksgiving dinner. So the whole team sat down. We had Thanksgiving dinner there. Me, Bubba, and we had 4 South Vietnamese. We had Sal, Hep, Phuc, and Tuan, our grenadier, was with us. And so this was Cambodia. And it was really different. It wasn't triple canopy. It didn't even have a full 50 feet. It was single canopy. It was much more open, reminiscent of an American forest where you could see some areas you could see far off, several hundred yards away. So we had the 20th SOS Green Hornets that were flying, and they were the main support element for that mission for us. And they were really good. But the rules of engagement for Cambodia were entirely different. And so we couldn't, we had no TAC air. What we had was just the helicopter gunships. That was it. And they told us we couldn't use white phosphorus grenades. It's like, what? We're at war with these people. Anyways, so we get in, and we had that target, and we moved, and we eventually walked into a base camp because there's fires, and fires were still hot, the ashes were hot, and one still had some kind of a pot or something where we could see it over the fireplace. And later on, Sal and Hep thought that one of the divisions had just moved out and another division was coming in. And at some point, we said, we took pictures, and then Sal could hear the NVA coming back. So like the tail element, that for the one unit that head south and one from the north, they came back, and we could see them running with their pith helmets, with their AKs at port arms. And they were coming back. We gave a prairie fire emergency, headed back to the LZ, doing our contingency drill, put down claymores along the way, M79 fire, and they kept coming at us. And we finally got the SOS came in really quick. The Green Hornets got there with their gunship, and we were doing the gun runs. So between us and the NVA, they were charging us. And we finally get back to the LZ, and when we were moving back, we even put down claymores with 5-second fuses. So they would run right into that claymore. And it was just like, we got back to the LZ, they came in and picked us up. It was the quickest pickup we ever had. And thankfully they came, because had they not, at some point they would have overrun us, because they had, each division has 10,000 men.
So this is just to get a better idea of the way that Laos and Cambodia are structured as far as setup, where the Ho Chi Minh Trail ran obviously through both countries, correct? And you guys are on completely flat ground in Cambodia for the most part. Yeah. So this run, they can see you the whole way. It's not like, they're having a hard time seeing through all that jungle. They can see you guys run it.
Right.
Wow.
They could see us, and we could see them. And so you see so far away, because at one point, to see those guys with the pith helmets and the AKs, we had never seen anything like that. I'll just take that image to the grave with me. And but again, the recon guys smiled on us, and we had the Green Hornets. They knew it was a bad target. They knew what the mission was. We had a really good briefing, and they came. I mean, in Laos, like that mission on Echo 4, we didn't even make radio contact for the first 2 hours of our firefight. We're just hanging on. And here, when we called out, they responded right away. We had instant radio commo with them. And then within 10 minutes or so, we had gunships making the gun runs. By the time we got back to the LZ, I forget exactly how long it was, they were ready to pull us when we were ready to be pulled. And then even when they came in, we had a 6-man team, and sent Bubba out first to let them know, again, about our little people. I don't want any mistakes here. We all jump on a helicopter, and me, I forget who was sitting next to me, and the door gunner. As we're just starting to lift off, it had been raining the day before, so that area was low. It was a lot of muddy area. And the NVA were coming out of the woods. A couple of these soldiers came out of the woods, and they were running at Port Arms. And then all of a sudden, they're in the clearing where we were with the helicopter. And you see these guys trying to stop. And the mud from the bottom of their boots was going up into the propellers of the helicopters. And they're trying to come down with their AKs. And me and the door gunner and whoever was sitting next to me, we're shooting these guys. You know those cartoons you used to see when people be running, then all of a sudden they're going backwards? Just like that cartoon character. In this case, the NVA, we hit them and we stopped them, and then Lily blew them back into the jungle as we're pulling out. As we're pulling out, it had that white phosphorus, threw it down, just saying, you know, we don't like you guys. And we got out, we get back to the Air Force Base. Hey, man, whew, that was close. Let's have a Thanksgiving dinner. Let's do it. So we have a Thanksgiving dinner, and it got cut short a little bit because somebody came in and said, hey, look, the brass wants to talk to you at FOB 6. They need a detailed intel report right now. So we fly back to base. Bubba went with the team. I went in, did the initial debrief. At the end of it, Colonel Drake came and said, hey, guys, good work day. Hey, let's go have dinner. Let's have a Thanksgiving dinner. So we had our third Thanksgiving dinner that night. Now, to show you the idiosyncratic nature of that war, 2 days later, we had a perfect insert. And the way the SOS would do it, the 20th Special Operations Squadron, they would go in and have dummy inserts. And so sometimes they would put the team in, then do dummy inserts, or they would do a dummy or two and then put the team in. So if the NVA were monitoring the helicopters landing, they weren't sure where we were. And sometimes they would take, we had a device, it was called the code name Nightingale, had explosive devices and sounds in it that sounded like rifle fire. And they would take a Nightingale, ignite it, and drop it off so that any NVA around would hear what would sound like a firefight, but it's really a Nightingale. Anything for PSYOPs. Well, in this case, I forgot when we got it, where we were with the fake insert, but we got in. Perfect insertion. We go in, set up our perimeter, give a team okay, we move out. There was a highway, I think it was Highway 31 in Cambodia. And again, it's this wide open, you could see for a long distance away. It was like being in an American forest, thin American forest. But we come up to the road, and the road had thick vegetation on it. It was so thick that I could go in, and with my camera, when the trucks would go by and the people would go by, take pictures, but they never saw me. So Bubba went out. He put a mine in. Put the mine in, ran the cable back, and we're going to blow up a truck and get a POW. And so all that was done. Came back, and I get a call on the clear. You are to return to base now at the order of General Creighton Abrams, who is the Supreme Commander for the Allied Forces. I go, WTF? Said, you know what my mission is? Yes. And the mission's in the ambush that we're going to get a POW. Said, they don't know we're here. No. General orders are, you get on the helicopter right now. So give us an LZ. So we gave him an LZ. We pulled, I left the mine, had Bubba rig the mine so that when that NVA truck came down, it would explode. We got pulled out. We get back to base. They go, did you throw a white phosphorus grenade on Thursday? I said, well, it depends. Is this for the record or off the record? No, for the record, nope. We had a white phosphorus that accidentally discharged. It fell out of the helicopter and must have gone off. I'm really sorry about that, but that was an accident. So the colonel called me in, Colonel Drake, Lieutenant Colonel. And he says, same thing, same question. I said, well, sir, do you want the official answer off the record? Well, officially, I just gave him the same story. I said, on the record, yeah, hell yeah, I threw that white phosphorus. We barely got out of there alive. You know how close it was. He goes, okay. And he covered for us. But that's so, they pulled us because we threw a white phosphorus grenade. They weren't concerned about the 100,000 NVA that were in Cambodia. And one of the things they were concerned about, because it was November, Thanksgiving, after Tet of earlier 68, they were worried about Tet, have the NVA build up forces to come back in 69 for another Tet offensive. So that was the primary mission. And 2 days later, we got inserted into a target. This time we went in the afternoon, and it was just so strange because it was, again, it's Cambodia. We set up the RON for that night. Everything was cool, but I just felt hinky. Now, we put our extra claymores out, and first light in the morning, we picked up the claymores, started to move out, and they came back and they said, hey, we got to pull you out. I said, what's with this pull out? And they said, don't argue, just give us an LZ. I said, well, we're in a wide open. And so we worked it out, popped the smoke. They came in and pulled us out. And so this was the day after November 3rd, like December 1st, December 2nd. And said, you're going back to Fubai right now. I said, why? So we had a king bee that got shot down up north with 7 Green Berets on it. And they had a mission, it's called Eldest Son, where we would carry ammunition like AK rounds that would explode when they used them, and mortar rounds. So those were called Eldest Son. And we also had soap chips, which was like propaganda papers and stuff. So they were flying en route to it, got hit by anti-aircraft fire. The King Bee crashed, everybody died. And so manpower shortage all of a sudden back at our primary base. So we flew back, and that was another part of the secret war. This is just 68, the first 6 months in country.
What were your deployments? Just 6 months or a year long?
Year.
Wow. Okay. So this was nonstop.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I think the Marines were 13 months, but ours were 12 months. And so we ran a few more missions in December. On Christmas Day, we had a target where we went in. The King Bee put us in on a little knoll. We were supposed to go further up the mountain, but they put us on a knoll that had a lot of elephant grass on it. So we moved off the knoll into the triple canopy, made contact, came back to the knoll. And south and to the west, it was just too steep. We couldn't use it. And to the north, it was pretty steep. But to the northeast, it was like a little corridor. But again, it was elephant grass. And we had gone directly to the east. So we came back. We had the contact. I called Spider. So we made contact with compromise. We needed an extract. And they came at us, not too hard. And then we had some NVA that were down south of us on the south part of the hill. And we're throwing hand grenades. And then the elephant grass all ignited. And then the NVA saw the elephant grass was burning. And the wind was coming up the valley, blowing up that hill. They started more fires. And the fire was coming up at us. We're waiting for the King Bees. And so at one point, the fire was getting so close to us that Lynn and Bubba were cutting blocks of C4 in an effort to blow the fire back down the mountain, just out of sheer desperation to hold the fire back. And all of us had singed hair, singed eyebrows. And at one point, we had talked about going up that northeast, but it was quiet. And Lynn goes, it sounds too quiet. Spider came back and said, we just had a top secret intel report. Do not go to the northeast. there's an ambush waiting for RT Idaho. I never had that happen before. So we didn't go. And at last minute, Captain Tuong, from the same Captain Tuong that saved me when I was upside down, comes flying down that mountain sideways. And I can see it's Captain Tuong. And the fire is here. They're shooting at us. And he came in. The prop wars blew black all the flames. And we jumped on the helicopter. We lifted off. All the flames came up over the hill. And it was like, oh my God. So we thanked Captain Tuong. He never had to buy a drink at Fubai, of course. But that Christmas Day, that was the one nightmare I had for years. After that was that my nightmare was that it wasn't Captain Tuong. There was a young lieutenant that they were training, and it was him flying. And at that point, when I looked up and saw Captain Tuong in my dream, it was that young lieutenant, and he pulled out and left us there. And it was like I always woke up with a sweat, feeling hot.
You know, I always wondered, it seems like you've always been able to communicate a lot of your story pretty well, at least the several interviews I've watched of yours, and plus the books and everything else. What do you think makes it, is it your sense of humor? What is it that makes it easier for you to be able to talk about some of the stuff that you went through over there compared to some of the guys we've talked to that maybe it's not as easy to talk about?
Well, in my case, it was just, well, first of all, we didn't talk about it for 20 years. We had that agreement, we knew. In fact, after my first book came out, Across the Fence, my dad read it. He goes, I could never figure out why this black guy came by and picked up our mail. Not the mail, the trash. Because we had the trash would be picked up Monday, Wednesdays, and Friday at our house in Trenton. And he said this black guy would come by occasionally, and he saw him pick it up, put it in a bag, and take it. Well, Dad got a new job at the post office where the FBI was. And he saw that guy coming out of the FBI office. He goes, that's the guy who was picking up our trash. Now, after I came back and got out of the Army, all that stopped. But they were picking up my trash to see if I was sending anything home that I shouldn't have been saying. So that's why. So we really didn't talk about it. And back then, nobody wanted to talk about it. So I kept quiet. Then I started doing things with Soldier of Fortune. I used a nom de guerre, doing some stories. I started back in like 86 or 87. Did a few stories for Soldier. Robert K. Brown was a Green Beret. And we got some of our stories there. And in my case, I felt the stories were worth retelling, if nothing else from our perspective, the Vietnamese we worked with, and always talked about the King Bee pilots, our American aviators, from the muskets, the Scarface Marines that supported us, and of course all the fast movers and A-1 Sky Raider pilots. And they were alive thanks to them. And of course my Vietnamese. We never had to worry about getting shot in the back by our little people, because Hep and Sal did the vetting on it. We trained them up, and they were fabulous fighters. They were better in the jungle than we were, This is an old story, but when I got first introduced to the team, Sal took one look at me and turned to Hep and said, he's too tall, his feet are too big, and he looks stupid. So this was my introduction. Now, Hep would never tell me that. He never told me. It took him over 6 or 7 months before he told me what Sal said that day. But I had to earn their respect as part of that unique relationship between Special Forces and our indigenous troops. So, and in my case, I just felt so fortunate, realizing how the history of SOG, how many teams have been wiped out. I mean, Glenn Lane, Robert Owen, these are all Green Berets that had far more experience than me, and other Green Berets that we lost, including our MIAs, who, outstanding soldiers, I'm going like, I don't know how I made it, only by the grace of the Lord. We got back, so tell our stories, and in both of my books, for Across the Fence and On the Ground, there's some of my stories, but I always include the other guys. And like Captain Tin, who saved us on October the 7th, 68, on August the 3rd, he saved RT Louisiana, well, ST Louisiana, with John Walton, Tom Cunningham. And John Walton was the son of Sam Walton from Walmart fame. But John was just an incredible medic, fearless. And that day, that team had gotten overrun twice. And the third time the NVA overran the team leader called in a gun strike, an A1 Sky Raider gun strike on the team. And that included a 20 Mike round like this. 2 of these hit the radio operator, Tom Cunningham. One hit the radio on his back, and the shrapnel exploded and it wounded the team leader. The second one hit his leg and threw Tom in the air, where he had an out-of-body experience watching his body fly through the air with his leg hanging by sinew. And then he watched his body land, and then he wondered if he was alive or not. So he called his name out, Tom, and Tom returned to his body then. So that story. And Captain Tin, he had come in, because August the 3rd, it's later in the day, like later in the morning. It was hot. They had high elevation. And so the plan was for him to come in to pick up the wounded. The next helicopter would come in to pick up the rest of the team, which was John Walton and his indigenous team member. Because in the first helicopter, they put Pete Boggs, the team leader, who was wounded from the shrapnel, Tom Cunningham with his leg dangling by sinew, and then the South Vietnamese, who was shot 4 times. And John patched him up, got him on the helicopter. They take off. The next 2 Kingies coming in get shot out. Captain Tin hears this. He turns around and comes back and lands to pick up John and the little people, because they're getting rushed now by the NVA. But there's not enough, it's so hot, he can't get enough lift for a transitional lift to leave. He starts going down the hill, because the helicopter has struts on it. He got enough lift to get over the trees, but not enough transitional lift to leave. He went down in the valley while getting shot at, took a couple of laps around this valley, then he left. Gets back, and John, to his credit, they landed. They go in with Tom and Pete and the indigenous team member who was shot 4 times. And the medics there go, the Americans, yes, the South Vietnamese, no. And John pulls his car 15 down. You will take care of him now. Well, they'd never had anybody talk to him like that. They were really startled. And at one point they go inside, and there's a doctor saying the same thing, and John goes, you're going to fix him or die. And so the doctor had never had that before, and so they had to give the indigenous troop an IV. Well, the doctor couldn't do it because John had shook him up. So John did the cut down and put it in and made sure they treated him. So that's why I always include other stories about the other teams. I always felt the valor and their story was, mine are interesting, but compared to what those guys were up against, Lynn Black on October the 5th, and then of course we had the Frenchman, and the Frenchman was on his very first mission. They'd been on the ground for 3 days, and they took a break, and he was the radio operator. So Doug got up, stood up, and he got shot in the back 4 times by AKs at close range. Went right down in his face. He thought he broke his nose. And so Doug jumped back up, startled, and the NVA thought he was dead. He got up, there's nobody there. And he realizes his radio's been shot. So he goes up to the team leader and says, my radio was shot, but I left it back there. The team leader goes, go back and get the radio. So he went back and got it, had 4 bullet holes in it. And he says, I don't think it works. And the team leader goes, oh, he had to get a new handset, put a new handset on it. And he says, it works. Okay, so Doug brought it back that night to get out. And that night he takes a shower. And the rounds went through the radio, went through his fatigues. Each round broke his skin on his back. But they fell down, and Doug had his pants taped up. So each of the rounds went down into his jungle boots. He took his jungle boots off and dumped the rounds outside. They took a shower, and he could feel the stings on his back. But Christmas Day, when we had the intel report that not to go to the Northeast, it was the Frenchman using that radio with the bullet holes in it. His team leader forced him to carry it to the field again, so he would learn never to throw away a radio. And off that radio, he had heard the NVA talking. He gave it to his interpreter, and the interpreter could hear the NVA saying, we're going to set up an ambush for Spike Team Idaho. They knew our team name. And that's how we got the intel report. So that's one of those little sidebars. And this is just within the first 7 months in country.
If I remember right, too, and across the fence, was it your father that was in the Battle of the Bulge?
Oh, no, Johnny McIntyre.
Johnny McIntyre's father.
Yeah, McIntyre, his dad earned a Silver Star at the Battle of the Bulge. Wow, that's incredible. And Johnny Mac was, he had a tragic accident on the 4th of July, 68. He was in his hooch. He was working on his web gear, and he cut through the web gear. It cut, and the knife hit the bedpost and caromed up and went through under his eye, through the eye, eyelid, up through the eyebrow. And they ran him up to the medics. They treated it, but we had to take him over to the Marine Corps had a medical facility there. For some reason, they took him there, and they said, "Oh, we're celebrating the 4th of July. We'll get back to it tomorrow." Well, during that night, infection set in, and he lost the eye. Wow. And so John was never the same after that. It was one of those little heartbreak stories. Yeah, Johnny McIntyre. And because out of our guys, he was the first guy to get on the ground, had brief contact, came back, goes, "This is crazy out there." So that's my first 7 months, and I was there for a total of 19 altogether.
Yeah, I think what we'll probably do is, as long as you're open to it, can always come back and do a part 2 and talk about each section, one at a time. I really enjoy just being able to sit down and talk with you. You have so many awesome stories, and it's just been a pleasure to speak with you in general. So we really appreciate you having us over and doing this.
Well, thank you. Well, we can do it again. So whatever is good for you guys, it's your show. My first book was Across the Fence. It came out in 2003, and then in 2011 I reworked it. We added 3 chapters, added 50 photographs. And so that's my very first book that we talked about a lot today, which includes the stories of the Frenchman, John Walton, Lynn Black with those missions. The second book was On the Ground, The Secret War in Vietnam. And this has more stories, which includes, we closed Phu-Bai, FOB-1, and we went down to CCN at Da Nang. Because in 68 we had 6 FOBs and they consolidated. So we had CCN, which is at Da Nang. We had CCC Kontum Central, and CCS South, which is at the old FOB 5 at Bambi Tuat. And they ran the missions from there. So here it's again the transition of our team going south, and then some other stories, which includes the day of August 23rd, when sappers hit the FOB-4, 23rd, 1968. They killed 16 Green Berets that night. And it It was the worst loss of Green Berets in our Special Forces history at FOB4. And so we have other stories in there that we'll talk about later another date. And then my third book was SOG Chronicles Volume 1, which the featured story here was one of the most successful missions during the 8-year Secret War. It was called Operation Tailwind. Operation Tailwind was a hatchet force out of Khartoum led by then Captain Gene McCarley. And in September of 1970, Premier Sihanouk left Cambodia. There was a leadership vacuum. The North Vietnamese were pushing hard to take over Cambodia. They were coming through Laos. The CIA had its own secret war, which is further west of our area of operations. They were getting hammered by the NVA, and they said, we need a team or an element to come in and distract the NVA, pull them off of us. And okay, so Gene McCarley took a hatchet force, 116 indigenous troops, 120 indigenous, 16 American Green Berets. They went in. It was past our area of operations. They had Marine Corps CH-53 Deltas that flew them out. As they were going into the LZ, they took enemy fire, still got off the helicopters. 2 or 3 indigenous troops were wounded, stayed on the helicopters and returned back to base because they were wounded, just on the insertion. They were on the ground for 4 days. They destroyed 2 enemy caches, received a lot of intelligence, and barely escaped alive. So that's the main story here. A couple other sidebars about a bright light for a team going back for another team that was wiped out. And so that's the third one. Someday, hopefully by Monday or within the next week or two of this year, 2024 of our Lord, that we're starting Volume 2, SOG Chronicles Volume 2. And then just for a really good book, anybody with further interest on our STRT Idaho history, MACV SOG Volume 12, produced by Jason Hardy. If you Google Jason Hardy, his books, he's done a total of 15 to date, series of strictly on SOG recon teams. It's the best collection of information on the team's history. Like in Idaho, Idaho was one of the first 5 teams. And Idaho ran missions all the way through the 8-year Secret War, which is documented here with more than 170 pages of history on Idaho and other recon teams. And the last footnote on that is...
You want to show a little bit of the inside of that one? I think it's illustrated really, really well.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a coffee table book. And as I open up blindly, there's Lynn Black with a big shit-eating grin on his face. And Doti Kwong, who Lynn and I took from Alabama, got him on RT Idaho. Doti Kwong in 1971 was the 01. Sal had gone to another assignment. He became the team leader, and Kwong ran missions across the fence with Idaho, all in Dig. Captain, and the last 10 was then Lieutenant Ken Bore, B-O-W-R-A, who stayed in the military through a historic career and retired as a 2-star general. Wow. Most of it in Spec Ops or with 5th Special Forces Group. One of our storied history members from our SOG history was Ken Bore. And Doti Kwong was the team leader that took the team across for missions, all in Dig missions from Idaho. That's part of our team history we're very proud of. I knew nothing about it until I met Ken. And then now with Jason's book, I learned more from the book about things about my team history that I didn't know. So I encourage anybody to patronize that. They're a little expensive, but it's quality, high quality. And thank you, I appreciate that.